You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Bette Lee Crosby.
Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. Author interviews, writing advice, the very best people in writing today. Join me each and every weekday. You can find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. Before we get started, let's talk about some sponsors today. Writing novels is hard, but Dabble makes it easier. Dabble replaces your word processor, doing what it can't. Dabble organizes your manuscript, story notes, and plot. It simplifies story, leaving more room in your brain to create. And after all, that is what being a writer is all about. Dabble was built from the ground up specifically for writing novels. It takes minutes to learn, and it makes writing a joy. See how Dabble will revolutionize the way you write with a free trial at www.dabblewriter.com. Also, thanks to our friend Mindy Tarquini and her book, Deepest Blue. From critically acclaimed author Mindy Tarquini comes a magical tale told sun to sun, moon to moon, heart to heart, and midsummer to midsummer. For fans of Paulo Coelho and Neil Gaiman, in an enchanted city seen only at twilight, a resentful second son unlocks secrets which could cause his world's star to finally set. Publishers Weekly calls Deepest Blue a haunting, lyrical fantasy dealing with love, loss, and political turmoil. Kirkus Reviews said there's a lot to like about Tarquini's Italian-inflected fantasy story, starting with her often lyrical prose. Deepest Blue by Mindy Tarquini. Thanks also to our friend Joe Leonardi, who is sponsoring the show. He has a series of novellas called The Damaged and Broken Collection. Tortured and Tormented, Creating a School Shooter is the first one. War Springs Eternal is the second. And then the third in the series called Is Suicide Painless? Joe is a fantastic storyteller, and he's telling stories that connect on a heart level, that make us look at the world around us and the crazy things that are happening, and maybe instill a little empathy into the way we look at the things going on. We're going to talk about them more this month as it goes on, but Joe Leonardi, The Damaged and Broken Collection, there's a link to it in the show notes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have my friend Bette Lee Crosby back on the show with us. She was on the show back in March, talking about her brand new book at the time, The Summer of New Beginnings. And you guys, that book has taken off and had a life of its own. And Miss Bette has a new book out. It's only been out a couple of weeks. It's called A Year of Extraordinary Moments. And we're happy to have you back on the show today to talk about it. Welcome, Bette.
It's my pleasure to be here, Hank.
Well, thank you. So yeah, it's been a busy year for you. You've had two major releases this year, and you've got some news about some other books of yours that have hit the USA Today bestseller list. How have things been going?
It's been a crazy, wonderful year. It really has been. The Summer of New Beginnings came out in March, and so it was in time to enter some of the book competitions this year, and it won 3 awards. So I'm really proud of that. The most recent was it won the Royal Palm Literary Award for women's fiction. It got first place in there, and it also placed as a runner-up for Book of the Year, which was really thrilling to me because that's one I had never gotten before. And it won the gold medal from Reader's Favorite for women's fiction. I'm sorry, not for women's fiction, for chick lit. Each competition has different categories that you enter it in. And sometimes it's considered women's fiction, sometimes it's considered chick lit. And in one instance, it was under adult fiction. So I guess it's a little bit of everything. It's a lifestyle story about two sisters and the things they go through. And life is never very simple. So I take the ordinary life and put it in extraordinary circumstances and see how the characters react. And that's a lot of fun.
Well, I love that, that the book was received so widely and that it fit into so many different genres. And I think you and I talked about this last time when, and by the way, I'm going to put a link to your previous show in the show notes so people can go back and listen, when we, to that previous conversation we had, but it was episode 343. We talked a little bit about genres and how, what a weird situation it is for writers to try to write a book that fits neatly into one bucket. And I love that your books are so widely received that they fit over here and they fit over here. And, no matter what thing it is that you love, your stories kind of fit there. And, I think that's fantastic.
It's so true that genres are really, and for some reason, genre is hard for me to nail down. And I think it's because I'm writing about lifestyle stories and our life doesn't fit in a genre. I mean, some days I'm a really good person and some days I'm a crabby old antagonist. So, I mean, I don't think I can fit in a genre, so my books don't either. But they've been, I must say, garnered a huge following lately, and I'm thrilled about it. I think people follow an author they like once they find that first book. I think getting someone to read that first book of a new author is always the biggest challenge. And once they read that new book, they say, "Oh my gosh, where has this author been? How come I've never heard of her before?" And they'll go on and read all the backlist, because I have 18 backlist books, and plus the 2 new ones, and one coming next spring. But my backlist to people who haven't read me before is all new.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a fun growing experience.
Yeah, and it's so fun to go on that journey with the author when you discover a new author and you go back and you can see how her stories have evolved and how she's evolved as a writer. But what I always find is that the thing that I love about a new writer that I discover is always there in the back catalog. Styles change a little bit. Craft gets better, obviously, the more we do something. But the thing that I fall in love with an author for is always kind of in the DNA of their writing.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's the same for me. I find that I think I gravitate to authors that have strong character voices. I like to read a book where I can tell without looking at who said something. I can tell by the way they've said it who the character is that's speaking, and I like that.
Right. If you can write dialogue with no dialogue tags and yes. the reader carry on the story without it, yeah, that's phenomenal. Absolutely. We won't, go over your whole history like we did in the previous, episode. Like I say, I'm going to link up the previous one in there, but just to kind of bring people up to speed, you had spent, a career in writing, but not writing fiction, and until you, kind of your storytelling gene, manifested itself again. And we talked about your Southern heritage and the great storytelling tradition that comes out of those of us from the South. But you wrote a couple of books that you did not publish, and those desk drawer novels that we all have. But your book, The 12th Child, was the first one to be, published, right?
Yes. And,
I think you've had some news about the 12th Child.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was like one of my early forays. It was I had already written 3 books at that point, but none of them were published. And I think when your work is good enough to be ready to go to market and when it's not. And it was a huge transition going from writing for business to to fiction. And although I'm a reader, an avid reader, and a born storyteller, and it still was a long transition. So those books were never published. And 12th Child, I felt confident about, and I entered it into the American League of National League of American Pen Women, and it won first place for fiction, women's fiction. And so I was very thrilled with that. And that was as a manuscript, and that kind of set me on my pathway. Once that happened, I said, well, I guess maybe I can make this a business.
Well, what's really cool is that first book that you published, The 12th Child, has recently landed on the USA Today bestseller list. And you're talking about the power of your backlist, that we were talking about a few minutes ago. I think, in the modern age of publishing, a lot of times we think that the latest book is, it has a window to get out there in front of an audience and to sell what it's going to sell, and then kind of goes into the backlist and kind of, lives back there lonely, because it's not the newest, latest thing. But you have, proven that theory to be wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. As I said, it may be my backlist, but to someone who hasn't, who's just learning about my books, it's just as good as the other stories.
That's right.
And especially that a lot of my fiction goes back to the 40s or the 50s or the early 1900s. So that never becomes dated. That's such a lovely era in our country's development that you can just, that stays current forever.
Right.
People always like to look back and see that era. And, it's amazing that there's so little done. We are seeing a lot of books now on World War II and even World War I, but there's a lot of American history that's just so rich in all that it has to say, but we don't see a whole lot of stories about it.
Well, and I've talked to a lot of those authors that are publishing those historical fiction novels that are so popular right now, and I think one of the things that we love about those stories is the farther we get away from those periods in time, the more we lose those stories. And we, if a child is in school right now, the farther we get away from World War I or World War II, they're going to learn less and less and less about it because there's just so much history to cover. And then we lose the human element of it. And for people writing historical fiction, they're bringing life back to those events, and we're able to connect with those world events through the eyes of these great characters that they're writing. Yeah. I think that's what's so fascinating about it.
I saw a very funny thing on television the other day. I listened to The Voice on television, and they had a young man, and I think he was probably 17, and he was singing this song, "Operator, can you place this call?"
We watched that episode last night. How funny.
And he said, "What's an operator?"
I know we had this whole conversation with my daughter that was sitting there with us. My wife Dawn and I were talking about, that as kids calling the operator and asking them all kind of random questions. And she was like, so it's kind of like Siri. And I was like, yes, exactly.
But if you were out and you were and you had to make a call, you put a dime in the payphone and the operator called your number.
Exactly. So funny. Oh, that's so funny that you just watched that as well.
I think that people enjoy stories about that era because to them it's new, and to some of the older women that read my stories, and even older men, I'm always surprised at the fact that I have so many men in my audience, because most of my protagonists, not all, but most, are women. But I think there's because they're stories of a time that some of these people remember.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't think you should be surprised at all because, a great story is a great story. And, I live with 4 strong women. And so, stories about women protagonists don't scare me off at all. Well, Betty, you've had two major releases this year, and I think when we talked last, you were just starting to publish with Lake Union. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, they're doing all of the Amazon publishing houses are just doing such great stuff and really turning the publishing paradigm on its head. Most traditional publishers don't publish more than one book a year. There's some stigma, that against, publishing too quickly or whatever. And I think they're proving that that is just kind of old hat. And, because, you're publishing 2 a year now. How has that changed your?
I did last year. I don't know that I will in the coming year. I'll tell you. When you're working with a traditional house, and Lake Union is in fact a traditional house, everything is done the exact same way it's done in the traditional New York houses. And there are so many more steps. I came from an environment of actually, when I started out, I was one person and I just did everything. But as I went along, I added an editor and a cover designer and all the people that really enabled me to grow tremendously. But even so, I could turn these things around, bing, 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 and move on to the next one. But it's totally different when you're working with a more traditional house like Lake Union, because everything is scheduled time-wise, and it takes long. And this last book, when A Year of Extraordinary Moments was releasing, I had, and there's always a lot of activity and hustle bustle and interviews, which are wonderful, and promotional events surrounding the release of a book. And at the same time that I was doing that, I was working on the developmental edits for the third book that's coming out in next spring. And so it got a little bit hectic. And I think, although this third book I just adore, it will be a book called Emily, Gone, and that will be a standalone. But I think you pressure yourself needlessly. I found that, I was working 10, 12 hours a day, and I don't think that's good for you. I think the more you have a balanced life, the better your writing will be.
Sure.
You can burn the candle at both ends for a while, but if you do that continuously, you will eventually get to the point where you're writing more formulaic stories, and that's just not my bag. I reinvent. I wish I could write formulaic stories. It would be a whole lot easier, but I reinvent the wheel every time.
Well, what I've discovered is if you spend so much time in the writing of stories that you don't live life, that your stories will become stale, and the writer forgets who he or she is reporting on. If we're kind of all reporting on the human condition, and if we get so busy doing the thing that we don't kind of fill the well back up, then we don't have anything to draw from anymore.
Exactly. If you're writing, and my whole thing with writing is I really write about emotions. That's the key ingredient in every single story. Is it's always an emotional journey. It can vary as to the period of time that it takes place in, the place it takes place in, whether it's male or female, but there's always an emotional journey. And if you can't go through that emotional journey yourself, you're not going to be able to portray those emotions truly. There are certain things that I don't write about because I feel like I don't have the capacity to understand that particular emotion. So I don't write about it. I need to write about emotions that I can honestly understand, whether it be grief or happiness, or the thrill of having a child, or the thrill of seeing a child achieve something that they never thought possible, or an older adult missing someone. But I need to write about emotions that I can totally understand, because when I'm writing that book, I need to be that person. I need to be that person who's suffering through the heartache of a lost child, or the heartache of having a child that's unable to hear. And I think that's the difference. And if you stretch those emotions to the breaking point, they'll become more shallow. So that's why I think, I don't know, probably maybe 9 months apart would be a good time, I guess. It would give me a breather in between, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Well, and every writer's different, and we all have to find what our groove is and what that healthy balance is. I think when we start saying, that you have to publish 3 books a year, or, I know some people that are publishing a book a month almost. And I God love them. I just don't think I could do it. But, hats off to the folks who can.
Yes.
But it's incredible. But you have to take care of yourself as a writer. That's for sure.
And I think that's very important. And one of the things I love about being a writer, and I found it especially with these last 2 books because they're so family oriented, both books, The Summer of New Beginnings and A Year of Extraordinary. That was a cute thing with the title. I wrote A Summer of New Beginnings, and then when I finished the second book, I just realized that at the end she made that comment. She said, "Well, it's certainly been a year of extraordinary moments." And I thought it was, because they're both a play on time, I thought it was kind of cool to have A Summer of New Beginnings lead into A Year of Extraordinary Moments.
Absolutely. That is so cool. I love it when things just kind of line up like that. Well, the new book is A Year of Extraordinary Moments. Let's talk about it a little bit. This is a really fantastic setup from the very beginning, and you're really kind of grabbing us by the heartstrings right off so we've got Tracy, who's a single mom, and she's raising a special needs child. Her son is hearing impaired, and she goes to work for the family business. Is kind of, things are going well and looking up, and then her past comes back, and then she's got she's got her child's deadbeat dad comes back and wants to reconnect, and then she's got a new romance, and then juggling those things to find out what's best for her. Where did the idea for this story come from?
Well, she's the sister of Megan, who's the protagonist in The Summer of New Beginnings. And when I first wrote Tracy into that book, she was like the counterpart to Megan, because Megan is so dedicated and such a workaholic and everything. It was easy for me to identify with that. And I had a sister who was kind of wild, and so Tracy was a little modeled after my own sister. And what I love about this second book is the action and the story is spurred on not by Tracy herself. She's the key ingredient in the story, but the story starts with Dominic's grandmother. We see a bad boy, but where did he come from, and what caused him to be that way, and how does his family react to it? That's kind of an interesting story. And this story starts with Dominic, who is Tracy's ex, and his grandmother lives in the same town. He's no longer in her town, but his grandmother lives there. Now, they've never met because, this was a runaway, not even marriage, but living situation. And she knows she's dying, and she has a big farm that, she's going to leave. And while the farm has not been worked, the tract of land that it's on is worth a lot of money, although no one realizes it at first. And so she goes through a real journey, if you will, in discovering that, first of all, she had always thought she would leave it to Dominic, but she comes to realize what he's like, and then she finds out that he has a son, and so she tries to connect with Tracy, and it's so interesting because older characters sometimes are just so deep. I mean, they have so much life that they've lived, and they're very often very principled by that point, and so it's really, she tries to get Dominic to do the right thing, and sometimes we don't know what the right thing really is. So it's very interesting. Everyone just loves that character. Alice is her name, and she opens the book by telling her part of the story and then saying, I intend to see that he does the right thing. Well, they spent the book trying to figure out what the right thing actually is. And it really takes a lot of interesting twists at the end, and you wonder as you get close to the end what really is going to happen, and it's a unique twist that I think is very emotionally rewarding.
Right. What were some of the challenges of having this character, the Tracy's son, who's hearing impaired? What were some of the challenges in writing that character, and what do you think he brought to the tension of the story and to kind of escalate things for her?
It started in A Summer of New Beginnings. Part of that story had to do with the dog was the one that helped them to discover that the child was 15, 16 months old, but he wasn't hearing. And they discovered it only because he was so crazy about the dog. And when he was facing the dog, he'd scream and yell and run towards him and everything. But if the dog was in back of him barking, he couldn't hear it. So it was, when I first started writing that character, I knew I had to have a child, and I had to have a child that wasn't easy, that had some kind of a challenge, because the bigger the challenge, the more invested the reader is in the story. If you only have a small little problem, like, okay, everybody has small problems, but if there's some big overwhelming thing, the reader finds himself really rooting for that character to overcome it. And in Megan, the first book, the dog helped them to find out that Lucas, the little boy, is hard of hearing, not hard of hearing, but deaf. And so he's now, by book 2, he's had a cochlear implant and he's learning to talk. But like with every child, there are challenges, and he will be like 4 years old before he reaches his speaking age. He will, before his speaking age reaches his actual age. So these are the years that this is going through, and Dominic has always proved a negative influence on the child. So Tracy doesn't want him back in her life. Which brings the whole ideas of family and that it really, I think a lot of people can relate to this and how do we deal with people in our life that are not the best for us? Yeah. Unfortunately, that sometimes can be the case, and you faced with a decision: do I let this poison seep into me, or do I just turn away and say it is what it is? We can control how we react to a situation, but we can't always control the situation, or certainly the other person. So I think that's the challenge, and the challenge that I like to give to my characters is I give them a really difficult situation, and then how they perform, how they react to it. And sometimes they react well, sometimes they react not well. Dominic reacted in a not well manner because he had an ulterior motive here when he wanted to come back. Tracy was confused because she wasn't sure what was the right thing. She wanted her child to have a father, but by the same token, she didn't want him to have the poison that Dominic brought with him. So I think that complicated relationships make for a very good story.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Wow. When you're writing a story like this, do you know from the beginning how these twists and turns are going to work out, or are you discovering it as you go?
A very interesting thing happened on this third book, and this one doesn't come out until the spring of 2019. But I think this one really typifies what I find to be my biggest challenge. When I start a story, I usually have square in my mind exactly where that story starts. I know exactly what the problem is. I know how the character feels about it and everything else. And I also know how I'm going to get, where I'm going to end up. I know that this is going to be the only satisfactory way that you can resolve this would be at this ending. But it's that middle part, the journey that takes you from having the problem to solving the problem, that is a very rocky road. And I worked with a fabulous developmental editor on this third book. And I love that she challenged me so much. And she said, oh, the middle of this, she said, the beginning is so powerful and the end is so powerful, but the middle kind of like scoops down and sags a little bit. And, I realized that is the hardest part of the book. Some people say the beginning is, and some people say the ending is always the hardest for them. But for me, it's that middle part. It's, to keep the pace up and to keep it quick and to keep it so it's reading smoothly and you never meander off of the path. You always have your character with their mindset on that goal. You keep them in that mindset. And I think that's the biggest challenge is getting through that middle of the book.
We call it a lot of times the mushy middle because you get in there and it's just, it's like, oh, there's no climbing out of this.
Yeah.
But,
you tend to take the road that says, okay, I'll throw in another red herring scene,
Right.
But sometimes that takes you a little bit away from the character's journey, if you will, or the arc of the story. And so that's not so good either.
Well, yeah, because then people start realizing, oh, she was stuck here. This is just what she did to unstick the story. And
sometimes the middle is where you find a lot of description and, the color itself in the walls and everything. But I'm I think moving past all of that.
Yeah, so what do you do when you get in that situation and you realize that, okay, this is just mushy and it's not doing for the story what it needs to? Thank goodness for a good developmental editor who can help us to see those kinds of things. But what do you do to kind of revive that part of the story?
The hardest thing to do is to take out 2 or 3 chapters that you just didn't, that you've written, and they were good chapters and they were well written, but they just didn't keep the pace of the story. And I think that's where you have to start. And it would seem that cutting is easier than rebuilding something new, but it isn't. It's like throwing your baby out.
Oh, it kind of hurts your pride a little bit, doesn't it?
I hope that I'm beyond that. I like to think that I take advice pretty well, and I'm always interested in the end result. And if somebody has an idea that's better, I jump on it, because the developmental editor, she would say to me, when he comes back there, there's a kidnapping involved. And she said, wouldn't it be good if he walks past someone from the town and the reader is concerned about that they will know who he is. So when I thought about that, I took it further yet, because I think when someone challenges you, at least with me, when someone challenges me, it stimulates my brain to think bigger and wilder and deeper. And so when I rewrote that whole chapter, I had him not passing someone in town. I had him sitting at the lunch counter, and he sits next to the sheriff, and they don't know each other, So I thought that was an even bigger part of danger. And they're having a conversation, and then the waitress says, "Can I refill your coffee, Sheriff?" And so I think that, if someone challenges you, that's your chance to grow even more, to get, more into it and deeper into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the new book is called A Year of Extraordinary Moments. Miss Bette, I love everything that you're doing. The book is out now in Kindle and paperback and audiobook. Any way that you like books, you can get it that way. Where can people find you if they're just discovering you and want to dig into that back catalog? And I know you have a lot of great resources for folks on your website. Where can they find you?
Well, you can always start at my website, and I keep everything simple because I never started out naming things for a book. It was always just me. So it's BetteLeeCrosby.com, and it's BetteLee Crosby, CROSBY.com. And that's my website, and they can find everything there. Samples. Actually, I have samples of the books, and they can download a free story for stopping by and subscribing to my newsletter. And the other place that's always good to look for me is on Amazon. If you just put my name in on Amazon, it'll take you to a whole list of my books, and it'll take you to a page that tells about every book and what year it was published and what formats it's available in. So either of those places, I would say, is always good to find me. And of course, I'm on Facebook. I really love Facebook. I've been doing a lot of Facebook Live get-togethers with my friends and fans, and I just love doing that. It's so personal, and I think the fans love it. They show up, they post their questions, and I answer them and talk directly to them, and they enjoy that. So I do too. I had to get past that, you could see every line on my face when I get up close on that phone. So once I moved past that and I could just concentrate on the conversation, I was fine.
There you go. There you go. Well, Miss Bette, it's fantastic to talk with you again. We hope that this book does as well as the others, and we're going to send everybody to see you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Hank. I just love coming to this show. It's such an interesting conversation with you always.
Well, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, please subscribe. Up next is an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Didn't your dad teach you not to trespass? Yeah. Sorry, I'll go. Joey stepped forward, but Hedwig remained motionless, blocking the only exit. No. Someone needs to learn a lesson about respecting other people's property. Joey felt unnerved and panicky. Please, Hedwig. Mr. Van Brunt. Please, Mr. Van Brunt. May I go now? Please? Not such a smart-ass now, are you? His voice grew flat and contemptuous. You little bastards think you run the world, but you have no idea. No idea where your food comes from, what your parents have to go through to put clothes on your back. Humiliating jobs, long hours, going gray, to provide for you. What are you talking about? Life. Real life. You think it's easy, don't you? Don't you? Those stupid adults doing their stupid adult things while you play all day. Well, it's hard. You hear me? It's hard. Joey's breath caught. He knew what Hedwig was capable of. What did you do to Jason? Nothing. Where is he then? Jason's run away from home. I don't believe you. I don't care what you believe. I'm the adult. I ask the questions. What did you do to my son? To Zeph? Is Zeph okay? No, he's not. Zeph is not okay. And it was you, wasn't it? You're the one who did it. Who did What? Who twisted his mind? I haven't done anything to Zeph. Don't lie to me! Hedwig raised a hand, and a fireball blossomed there. Joey had never seen Hedwig's gift before. The man held a piece of hell. His face looked like something carved from driftwood, full of cracks and crevices. His eyes were shadowed and vacant, but glittering with flame, like knotholes full of fireflies. Yeah, someone's mind had twisted, but not Zeph's. Hedwig's gone batshit. Hedwig passed the fireball from one hand to the other. Did Zeph send you for his things? I know you know where he is. He said he was in love with you. Hedwig made it sound as if Zeph had confessed to murder. Is that true? I don't know. Hedwig broke into a wide grin. Well, we can find out, can't we? He's a Pynchon, right? A Pynchon would know. Know what? You're not making sense. It's their gift. The Pynchon gift. My son's a Pynchon, like his whore of a mother. And Pynchons are telepaths. They always know when the people they love are in danger. Joey's eyes had gone wide. He blinked, trying to process the information. Zeph had a gift? For sure? They have a psychic alarm. If you hurt someone they love, they come running. He raised the fireball. So let's find out. Let's find out if Zeph really loves you. Let's see if he's a fag or not. I know he's not. You'll see. He won't feel a thing when I do it. When you do what? When I burn you black. Joey went cold. Hedwig meant it.